the Buhari administration came into power, there was something that they brought with them. And that's the need to celebrate the young ones, to have the Not Too Young to Rule bill accepted and passed into law. Since then, we've had quite a lot of young people who have done so much and are excelling in their various chosen fields of endeavor. Now, put that aside. We know that power is a perennial problem in Nigeria. The generation, the distribution, both in the cities, in the urban areas, and in the rural areas. Now, let's try to merge these two together. How do we get the young people to be able to hold their own in their chosen fields of endeavor and possibly help us to generate and distribute power? Well, I'm sure you're wondering what I'm talking about, but of course, you know that the program is Executive Discourse, coming to you on the network service of the NTA. My name is Ololade Adeniji Adele. My guest on the program today, from what you must have guessed, is a young man who is doing so well, at least from the little that I've been able to glean of him. He's doing something in the area of electrification, but specifically rural electrification. I'm talking about the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Rural Electrification Agency, REA, Ahmad Salihijo. Hello, Engineer Ahmad. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Hello, Lolade.
It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you very much.
In December 2019, you were appointed the MD,
Yes.
CEO of REA, the Rural Electrification Agency. For a young man like you, I mean, don't mind me, I'll keep
Saying
rubbing
that I'm
it
young.
in. Yes, I'll keep rubbing it in. For a
Yes.
young man like you, taking up this rather challenging agency, what is it, would you say your background, or what is it that has prepared you to be able to take up this lofty agency? Because it's an agency that comes with so much, and so much is expected of it. What is it that has prepared you for it?
I think the major thing that prepared me for the role is the fact that I've been a public servant my entire career. So I've been able to work at very high levels of government. So when I was in the Ministry of Finance, I was working within the highest level with the minister, with the project director. When I came and I was working in the Federal Ministry of Environment, it was the same thing. I was working with the minister, I was working with the PAMSEC, I was working with the directors in that agency. And even when I was in the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, at the early days, it was only myself and the DG. So I was very, very, I had the privilege to understand, the processes around how, government works. I was part of the setup of that agency. I was able to be the one to go and set up the initial policy documents. We had an opportunity to go and get our self-accounting status from the Office of the Accountant General. I was part of the people who went to push for the salary of the agency. So there were so many things that if you don't actually have that visibility from the early stages, you wouldn't know that these processes actually go on. So when I came to the Royal Electrification Agency, all I found is that all the things I've been learning, during the times when I had those roles, I was just seeing them unfold in front of me because I was able to relate them to some of the experiences I had during the times when I was working in those roles. So I think part of what is very, very important, Lolade, is that don't ever allow yourself to remain in your comfort zone. So I could have remained in ICRC, and happily earning a salary. But whenever I felt I wasn't so challenged, I looked for another opportunity. And
to
I
challenge
go and do a
yourself.
secondment, came back, for 2 years, experience it a little. If things are not, I'll go on another secondment. So I think this is what gave me the overall, understanding on how government works. And then at the tail end of my government career, I now had a stint in the private sector where I was now able to tie up things I had learned in terms of policy, in terms of understanding what we're doing now in the, in the climate change, when you're talking about all the Nigeria's nationally determined contributions. I now found a space within that renewable energy space that I could now tie those two together. And incidentally, when I now came to the Royal Electrification Agency, it so happens that this is one of the major things that
Major things
I
that
would
you're
now
doing.
be doing.
Yeah. In all of this, I keep asking myself in my head, for a young man, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is not the norm, you decided straight up to go into civil service. Why? Because you find out that people don't, ordinarily, Nigerians these days consider the civil service as a last resort. So why did you decide to go into civil service straight up?
I think I wouldn't say I decided.
Okay.
I think there's something about fate, right? So when I finished my education, I did my NYSC in an electrical electronics consulting firm. So I was gearing up to go into telecommunications, so I had applied to various telecommunication firms. But as fate would have it, I just didn't get called to attend any interviews. Whereas when the government opportunity came, I was just sitting down and I got called from the office of the chief economic advisor. And the call was that, okay, we are aware that, you have finished because part of it was also because, I come from a background where, there's a lot of people who are looking out to see, to ensure that, you finish school. So you have a lot of mentors, so said, okay, why don't you come in and see what you can help us do? So they gave me a role of a research assistant. And for me, the way it tied to everything is because as I was even in university, I was always interested in ensuring that, you're doing something for the community. So, you have a little foundation for water, you're interested in what people are doing in education, so there was always that side of me that enjoyed public service. So it was when I started the work that I realized that there's a satisfaction that actually comes with it, especially when you're delivering on what your mandate is, because naturally, as you deliver on your mandate, you are actually serving the people, and so for me it was like, the whole thing now.
It was a convergence.
It was a convergence, exactly. So, and even during the time when I was in public service, a lot of people didn't understand, so what is a trained engineer doing in public service? It didn't make sense to a lot of people.
Yes.
And it's something that, to be honest, I did struggle through it, but I said to
Okay,
myself,
somehow it didn't really make sense to
yes,
you
but
too.
I'm like, okay, I believe I'm doing the right thing, so I continued going at it, I continued learning, and I'm quite a hands-on person, so I continued to try and understand how it works, and I continued to develop myself. And in everything I was doing then, even within government, I just wanted to be sure that I was understanding the processes. I could understand, okay, why is this, why have these things been put in place? Why do these things operate in this manner? So I continued to push myself, and I think, as you rightly said, is not the norm. So what you find is that typically during those times when I'm discussing with some of my peers around charity work, they're just looking at me like...
what's he talking about?
Exactly. So,
all right, having come this
yeah.
far, I mean, with REA, I must ask this question. Nigeria is a country which is bedeviled by the challenges of power generation, power distribution. What has the experience in REA been like for you so far?
Certainly, the experience has been a very, very interesting one
Okay.
because having the opportunity to be able to plug this gap. So, as you mentioned, there are issues, as you have said. However, there are also a lot of improvements. A lot of work is currently ongoing within the on-grid space. We have the presidential initiative with Siemens. We have the overall upgrade of infrastructure within the transmission. We have so many generation plants also coming into play. So the role that the REA was always supposed to play, is to identify those areas where they are far away from the grid and we do not have that infrastructure to be able to take power to those areas. So while the on-grid space continues to improve, the idea of the Rural Electrification Agency is to ensure that the areas where we have the unserved Nigerians are also being catered for. So this is why the agency had a department initially under the Federal Ministry of Power, but because of how critical it was for them to serve Nigerians that didn't have that power, they created an agency out of it, and so far, what that agency has been doing is to try and close that gap. So that people within the rural communities do not have to wait for a really long time before the grid improvement gets to them. And the way we design our projects nowadays is that when the grid also comes, there has to be that convergence between the grid and the off-grid work that we've been doing. So this is the kind of role the agency is supposed to play, plug that gap, so that within the rural areas, you have economic clusters, you have economic activities. They also require a lot of power. So this is how the two the on-grid and the off-grid complement each other. So this is exactly
what your experience has been like.
Yes.
Now, looking at Nigeria, even though I cannot say specifically this is the figure, but I know that about 70% of Nigeria is still very rural. Looking at that volume of homes to cater to, communities to cater to get electrification for them, how are you able to do this, looking at the volume of work? Because even for the urban areas, it's a Herculean task.
Absolutely.
Now, looking at the rural areas, in a country where we have most of it being rural,
absolutely,
how are you able to function? How are you able to, deliver on that mandate?
Well, sometimes, you take things, in piecemeal. You have a huge target, as you have said.
Yes.
So we have, we're guided by policies under the Federal Ministry of Power. We have the Rural Electrification Strategy Implementation Plan, where we have certain targets, like the Vision 30-30-30, in terms of what we need to do for renewable energy. We have targets that the country has signed also globally for climate change. We're going to make some of those commitments as well when we go to just the recently upcoming COP27. So what you find is that within that entire space, as an agency, you need to find what role you can play to contribute to all these targets. And typically, you have various ways of doing this. So what we've tried to do at the Rural Electrification Agency is not to be a one-trick pony.
Okay.
So you look at things from various perspectives. You look at things from what do you get from government? What support do you have from government that enables you to do this job? So we know that money from the budget and waiting every year to deliver infrastructure through a 1-year budget cycle, has its own challenges. So you ensure that you design those programs in such a manner that you can see them through with the money you're getting from the budget. And incidentally, what that does is that it proves that the concept actually works.
Okay.
So we've looked at within that space, mini grids. We've looked at solar home systems. We've looked at traditional grid extension projects. And what gives you the distinction between the kind of technology you use is how far away the community is from the source of electricity. So there are areas where naturally that it doesn't make much economic sense to extend the grid over a certain number of time because you have things to do with AT&T losses. You just cannot afford to do that. So in those areas where you have a community, it's better for you to deploy technology like a solar mini grid, where within an area that you have 100 communities, 200, 300, you can give them a dedicated mini grid, and you will now be able to generate and distribute that power within the community.
Within those communities.
You also have areas where they are so rural, and the communities within those areas are not so many. So you have 10, 15 households. Within those communities, their need for power is also very, very little. So you can deploy solar home systems, where you can use that to give them the kind of power they need to charge their telephones, to have lighting, to have a television, etc. So where I'm going with this is that depending on where you get the funding from, you mentioned some very huge figures. So obviously it will be difficult to have this model around waiting to get money from government. So what have we been doing in the Rural Electrification Agency is that with the small money government has, can you use that money to catalyze additional investment into the sector? Additional investment from the private sector.
Not from the government.
Not from the government alone. So you use government money to see how it can catalyze additional investment. So this is why we have the Rural Electrification Fund, for instance, where we're giving out capital subsidy, for developers who are willing to risk and go and deliver projects on behalf of government. So in those kind of situations, you are giving out capital subsidies. So you are using government money and you're allowing private sector to come in. So in a typical project, you can offer a subsidy of maybe 50%, where the private sector will contribute the rest of the 50%, build the infrastructure, ensure that there is a commercial use of that infrastructure, and distribute that power within the community, and they get paid for it. And there's also within that space a different variation where you can still use government money as a subsidy, but you tie it to the performance of the private sector. So what you do is that with the likes of the World Bank and the AFDB now, those are the kind of programs we design with them. So we say to the private sector, you can come in, select a number of sites, through the performance-based grant, or select a number of communities for the output-based funds under the solar home systems, and you go ahead and deploy the required infrastructure, work with the community, sign all the necessary agreements, and after that, if you present to us within 3 months that you have done the work and we have verified it, then we would now be in a position to offer you a percentage of what you have done as a grant or as a subsidy. Then that way we have tied it to your performance, and then it encourages you to do more.
And even encourage others.
And even encourage others. And with that, that concept has now opened up the space where commercial entities are also coming in to understand the structures that we have, and they are now designing products, to ensure that it suits this sort of model that we're doing. So we now have concessionary debt coming in, we have people coming to invest in equity, and all within this particular space that we have been building around rural electrification, around renewable energy, around ensuring that there is also productive use of that energy by the time we take it. So within these programs that we have been running in the capital project, Rural Electrification Fund, the Nigerian Electrification Project, and the Solar Power Niger, we have been able to understand at each stage, the kind of funding we require, just so that we're able to hit the targets that we have set
You're
for
obviously
ourselves.
bringing, well, I'll want to use the local parlance. You're obviously bringing native sense, native business sense into running a government agency. The REA has claimed to have connected over 100,000 communities.
We've done more, yes.
Okay, you've even done more.
Yes.
Okay, well, I will stick with over 100,000
Okay.
communities that the REA has claimed to have connected. Now, I'm wondering, what are the factors that you put into consideration when thinking of these connections? Of what value are these communities that you have, decided to connect? Or is it just basically playing the role of, yes, you're a government agency and that is your mandate to ensure that everyone is connected?
So I'll take us back a little from what I had said earlier. This question that you have raised depends solely on where we're getting the funding from.
Yeah.
As you know, we do have our own plans, but during the time when we're doing budgeting, we have to also adhere to the appropriation. So we implement whatever we have within the appropriation law, but we work very closely, of course, with the members of the National Assembly, where there are a lot of constituency projects, and we do implement some of those projects on behalf of government as well. So when you have the appropriation law, obviously whatever comes within the appropriation law, as a government agency, you would implement that. Then in addition to that, if you talk about the Rural Electrification Fund, within the Rural Electrification Fund that is established by law, it gives us a clear guide in terms of what we have to do with any money that we received. And it's very clear that we have to spread it around each geopolitical zone, which is what we do when we're designing the ref calls. So right now we have a ref call that has just closed and is spread out within all the 6 geopolitical zones.
So every geopolitical zone you're saying is equally catered
to? Equally catered to, from a monetary and a project perspective. So with the way we have designed that now in the Rural Electrification Fund is actually what we are required to do by law. Then if you now look at the projects that are more private sector driven, this is where it gets a bit trickier. Because with the projects that are private sector driven, you need to ensure that those areas the private developers are going to actually make some commercial sense. So we work with some development partners and we have data that we usually share with the private developers where we believe these are some very, very key areas that you have some markets, key areas where you have some economic activity. We also look at the occupation of these communities. Are they made up of farmers? Are they traders? Do they have the willingness to pay? So based on that, those private sector developers are able to make informed decisions. However, in a variation of that, we as an agency, so for instance, under the mini-grid program that we're doing with the World Bank, we had to separate the 2 funding windows for the mini-grids into 2, the performance-based grant and the minimum subsidy tender. So what we do with the minimum subsidy tender, for instance, is government now has to go and find those areas where we believe are not viable. So we have to now bring those areas up, then bring in the private developer to say, okay, you now compete for these sites, and whoever tells us that they are going to do it for the minimum subsidy is who we give the job to.
Despite identifying those areas as not really being viable.
Yes, but we still throw it to the private sector because sometimes competition also brings a lot of creative ideas. Exactly. So, but we rely on them to now make those submissions and say to us that, okay, we have looked at these communities, and within these communities, private sector number one or company A would say that I can do this with the minimum subsidy that you're going to give me. And this is what now differentiates that particular company to the other companies. So this is what we use to do the blend. So the areas where they are not so viable, you know, we ensure that we put in more government money there. But the areas where they are more viable, we bring in more private sector funding. This is how we go about, you know, so there isn't a one size fits all approach. But as you rightly said, as long as, you know, those areas are off grid, are underserved, you know, we are trying to move to those areas, as we say in our slogan, one community at a time.
At a time.
Yes.
One community at a time, you say, but I'll also take you back to something you said a little earlier. And I noticed that you've been talking more of solar generation of power. Yes, I know we're richly blessed with a lot of sunlight. But I also know that there are other sources of generating power, which we have in abundance in Nigeria. I'm looking at wind energy for one, for which the northern part of Nigeria is hugely blessed. Water is another one. I mean, in recent times, not just Nigeria, but the whole world seems to be suffering from climate change. And we have had our own fair share in Nigeria with a lot of flood. How about, I'm just thinking, how about harnessing, you know, maybe these waters and then using these other sources of energy to, you know, actually provide energy and electrification for our people? Why just solar?
No, absolutely. I think you're very, very right. But I think if you look at the solar technology and how it has evolved in the last few, maybe in the last decade or so, you know, it has become very, very reliable, is safe, is clean, and most importantly, is easy to deploy. So in areas where you have communities, you know, you want to intervene quickly, you know, and, you know, you want to intervene in such a manner that you're also not spending a lot of money while you're intervening. So if you put these technologies side by side, solar is what makes sense from an economic standpoint in terms of, you know, how much it is, and also from a standpoint of deployment, deploying it in such a manner that it's fast. However, we are not ignoring the other aspects, as you have mentioned. You know, we are not the only ones in the space. You know, we work very closely with our supervising ministry. Our supervising ministry is doing a lot of projects in hydro, for instance. They are doing, the ministry is doing a lot, you know, as we are even, you know, we're just about to finish the Zungeru hydropower plant, you know, Kashimbila as well, you know, so there are quite a few of those plants, and I know the ministry is also championing, you know, the small hydros initiative, you know, under the Renewable Energy and Access Department, you know, so it's almost like, you know, we're working to complement, you know, so that we can have that kind of coverage. So we're not in a hurry to jump into something we don't understand. So this is why, you know, within the Rural Electrification Fund in the last year or so, you know, we have also designed what we call the Innovation Hub, you know, the Research and Innovation Hub, where we have identified some of these technologies that you have mentioned. Unfortunately, not hydro, but we have looked at waste to energy. You know, we have looked at trying to see how we can use various other types of technology within the country, you know, so we've looked at, you know, things around cooling systems, and we've called in people, you know, to do a demonstration. We've looked at e-mobility, you know, so that within that demonstration, we can use it to be able to understand the technology better.
To test
then
the waters.
exactly. So when we understand it, and we can now plot it with the model that we're doing for rural electrification, and if that makes sense, we'll of course work with our supervisory ministry to see how we can now situate it within the rural electrification strategy, to see how we can advise to say if there are certain communities that are better suited for a different type of technology than solar. So it's still work in progress, but we are certainly looking at the possibility of diversing the technology that we use.
In all that you have said, obviously you're doing so much. Yet, I find it difficult to comprehend that a country that is probably just the size of maybe Texas in the United States, we're finding it so difficult to have electrification all through, either in the rural areas or in the urban areas. Now, from your experience in REA, what have these challenges been?
We have a very big population as well, so the what you apply for countries or states like Texas and what you do in Nigeria are entirely different.
Yeah,
so
but they don't even have as much resources, natural resources,
yes,
as we do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yet we're finding it so difficult.
So I think from my little experience, what I've seen is that we have to continue to work together, within the sector. And this is why one of the major things our honorable minister does is on a bi-weekly basis, for the first time, everybody that is working in the sector, we have the technical working group, where we sit, so myself, the MDs of NEMSA, NEMCO, all the agencies under the ministry, including the directors, the regulator, the Siemens program. So we have to always continuously work together, so continue to coordinate, and we have been doing that under the Honorable Minister of Power, the Honorable Minister of State for Power, and under the entire ministry, where we have been ensuring that we know what each other are doing. So I think for me this is a very, very good step. It's a fundamental step that needs to continue, because the issue of electrification is not a one man's problem. Even within the Ministry of Power, you can easily say, the Ministry of Power is the one to deliver this. Yes, you are right. However, the ministry also has to work, with NNPC, who are the ones providing the gas. So there are various intricacies around this, and we have seen that within this government, as you have mentioned, that coordination has been very, very good, because even at the highest level, the president set up a technical working group in the vice president's office that also talks to all the players in the sector. And don't forget, power is also a business, so you have to look at the commercial aspect of it. Is there enough liquidity in the market? Are people investing additional money? So the problem, is not as simple as people make it look, but what you have to understand is that we are continuously putting in the effort, the resources to continue to improve and bring in more generation, continue to improve our transmission infrastructure, then working with the Discourse as well, to continue to upgrade them, to ensure that they are also metering properly. So if you look at the whole value chain and the efforts that we're doing, the on-grid and off-grid, I think it's just a matter of time, before we get there, and don't forget, sometimes when you hear the success stories, you forget what has happened in the past. So today that you're mentioning Texas,
we've been running 60 years.
If you are talking about Texas, you don't know what they have also gone through in the past.
Yes, they have gone through theirs.
Exactly.
But I mean, ours has taken us over 60 years
we will
and
get
still
there.
counting.
We will get there, Lolade.
And that brings me to my next question, because the truth of the matter is that when you speak to the average Nigerian in terms of the state of power in Nigeria, people will say, oh, it looks like it was a whole lot better before the government, divested its shares into private hands, that perhaps Nigeria had it better under NEPA than PHCN, rather than we have with the Discourse. I know that, yes, yours is rural electrification, but excuse me, you're also involved in power. So maybe I'll put you on the spot here.
I do agree with you that government is held accountable. However, I think when there's also progress, people should recognize progress. So we usually have, at times, get into this mode of, everything has to be perfect, But once there are also improvements, I think we need to recognize that. So I don't want to also delve into what has happened with the privatization, just because, as I said to you, I don't want to speak to you exactly. Maybe it's above my pay grade. But I have an understanding of it. But to be honest, I think we have to continue being patient. There have been a lot of effort that has even been put in to rectify some of the issues that have happened during that time. So, for instance, government is holding the Discourse a lot more, they are holding them, more accountable, ensuring that they are doing more metering. In fact, they are designing the national mass metering program, or they've designed it and it has already kicked off, where, you're looking at, ensuring that each one of your customers is actually getting metered. So, the improvements are happening, at each stage. If you look at transmission, there's a lot of investment going into transmission, to improve the infrastructure through TCN. We have, the Africa Development Bank, the World Bank, JICA, AFD. They are all bringing their money to improve that. And of course, the Siemens, you've been following that,
yes.
We have even started receiving, some of the infrastructure from Siemens.
Yes.
And so we just have to be patient. I believe you me, we are going to get there, and this thing will be a foregone conclusion.
Oh, I'm waiting to see that day. I'm really waiting to see that day. Now, let me just take you on something you said now, because it's actually been in my head. When we talk rural electrification, I don't know how it works. I'm a novice here. So I don't, and I'm sure that a lot of Nigerians too, when we talk rural electrification, they are wondering, okay, these rural areas that are being connected, that are being provided with electricity, how do you measure their consumption of electricity? Are they metered? And if they are metered, how does it operate?
Yeah, so it still takes me back again to the mode that electrification was delivered. So if you are seeing, delivering that electrification through the capital budget, for instance,
yes.
is not something that you would charge for. So you can have a mini grid, then we usually form like a renewable rural electricity users cooperatives, and then we work with them, and they continue to maintain the infrastructure. These days we're having collaborations with even distribution companies, because they also have their franchise areas. So we work with them, and they continue to maintain that infrastructure. But if you have a situation where it's private sector driven, of course they will get metered, because as part of the agreement to even bring that infrastructure by the private sector, the community is sensitized. So they understand that this is not free power.
Service.
So they you must pay, so they get metered, as you rightly said. But the consumption, is usually not very high, and they only get metered and pay for what they have consumed. So if you look at the typical rural community, I mean, most of the time, they might not even be home, especially during the day.
Maybe at the farm.
They might be away. So maybe it's when they come back. So if you look at the consumption, you find that it's not, it doesn't pass a few watts, a few watts a day. So what you see that is that, what they will have to pay, would be just for what they're actually consuming. So you're absolutely right. They get metered, and the power gets distributed across. So, I mean, it takes me to, there's a community I visited, and if you see the kind of impact we usually have with these projects, you find that we go to the most remote areas. So this community didn't have power for more than 200 years. I think it's in Ogun State. And the way,
as close as it is to Lagos.
Yes, the way we had to drive to get to that community, another day you will have been shocked. There was a lot of, it was very hilly, the road was untarred, but when we went into the community, you found, I think at least 800 to 1,000 people, living in that place. Yes. And one of our developers, under the Rural Electrification Fund, actually opted, because we found the community through the state government.
Okay.
So they opted to do a mini grid, 100 kilowatt mini grid for them there. So when we saw the joy in their faces when they were able to access power, the payment was not even
an issue.
The major issue, the payment, because they were into, they're mostly rice farmers, so when we now went back to even look at what was happening there, what we now realize is that, the developer decided to invest in a rice mill, that he was now using, to recoup his money, and it has formed a whole economic cluster just because we were able to
identify that location
exactly and bring that power. So I think within the rural communities, especially if you're worrying or if you're concentrating on what they are actually using the power for, you would see that we're only going to improve. So even though there are those challenges, but by the time you go to the rural communities, what you find is that we have done a lot, and things are actually happening, and economic activities are moving.
Now, Engineer Ahmad, you've been in this office for quite some time now, and yes, I'll agree with you that some successes have been recorded, and you have also agreed that there's still so much that can be done. What's your own experience coming from the perspective of being a young man and taking up this office?
Well, I know you keep on saying that.
Yes, I will keep on saying it, because really we're all about, giving the young people opportunity to rule, not just paying lip service to it.
No, absolutely. And I think when given the opportunity, I think it's very, very important to also ensure that you have been given the opportunity, and you have been able to prove that it's worth giving you that opportunity. So for me, this is the most important thing. And this is what keeps me going, because you have a legacy you want to protect, and this legacy is that, if you come into work, you see it through, you find that there are challenges, but you don't dwell on those challenges. You try to improve upon them. You come up with mechanisms that will encourage or to make you get ahead of those challenges. So tomorrow, they would say is one young man that came and built this agency, even after I leave, and the agency continues to deliver on its mandate for rural electrification.
Upon coming on board, it was on the wake of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So together we were able to design and deploy primary healthcare centers for 200 PHCs, primary healthcare centers, where we provided electrification access to these centers. In the same vein, we have been able to also look at the way we deploy projects in a very programmatic fashion. So there was some deployment of solar home systems as well to tertiary institutions, the secondary schools, where we provided some home systems in their clinics. We also, in the last year or two, have been able to look and focus on the agro sector, just to be able to support government's mandate in terms of poverty reduction and the growth strategy of the federal government. Under our program, where we focused on intervening in agriculture, we recently have been able to deploy over 2,000 solar irrigation pumps to support rural farmers to be able to improve their livelihood. You would agree with me that there's benefit here because of the energy cost that is currently rising. and there's also the environmental benefit in terms of climate change. So we've started to get a lot of positive impact by this intervention because the farmers are able to increase their production and have, the opportunity to do all-year farming.
There have been a lot of improvement in terms of staff welfare. Recently we have not mixed any of our staff promotions. It's the understanding of the MD and his interest in developing the staffs. Then outside, maybe in terms of project or achievement in deploying our mandates.
For me personally, as somebody that is in charge of the Rural Education Fund, it's been particularly difficult for me to, in as much as we've raised some funds, but compared to the scale of the problem, it's still like a drop in the ocean. Constantly tasked with looking for more innovative ways and new frontiers to raise capital for the agency to carry out its function. Sometimes you need to, battle some people, or some agencies, or some institutions, and it's a constant battle until we provide electricity to the last person in the rural community that doesn't have electricity. It's going to continue to be a battle. But MD has made it easy. He has always supported wherever we need to go, whoever we need to talk to, whichever door we need to knock on. He had always stood behind and beside us, and we've been able to raise some money.
When you look at the space in Nigeria, well, generally in Nigeria, even though things are improving for the women folk, I also see that we have some women who are being, they are players in this field of electrification, power, and all of that. You even see the MDs of some Discourse who are women. I'm wondering, at the level of the REA, what's the level of participation of women in electrification?
I think this is always a very, very critical question because if you don't actually deliberately design your programs to include women, as you rightly said, it might not happen. So within our program, so I'll use the Energizing Education Program, for instance, where federal government approved a few years ago, in 2017, for REA to do 37 federal universities, provide them with captive power. So as a deliberate attempt within those programs, as we've been implementing them since I came, there was already a STEM program that was actually put into that program. And
that's the science, technology,
exactly. And that STEM program is actually just for women. In fact, I started, there was an interview I rendered, they started asking me, so does it mean that men cannot participate?
Yes, because I was going to ask you that
exactly.
too.
No, it's just that we concentrated on women. So these are female engineers, who during the time when the contractor comes in, they have to build like the workshop, so the technical workshop center, that comes within the contract. So with that workshop, what they do is that, as they are implementing, they are working hand in hand with the university, where some female students, in engineering are being nominated. So they work with them during the design, they work with them during the implementation, and eventually after it has actually been commissioned. So these are all things that have been designed deliberately within those energizing education programs. And also as part of our monitoring and evaluation for the Nigerian electrification project, we actually, track, the number of women that, are being headed, so the households being headed by women. MSMEs being headed by women as well. Just that I don't have the figures in front of me, but we can actually provide you with the exact number of figures. I can see the slide in my head. The exact number of figures for the kind of households that we have been able to, that are all women. and then so the households headed by women, and the MSMEs also headed by
Also
women.
headed by
So we
women.
put it into our program, so it becomes a natural thing. So by the time you're even delivering the program, you already have a target
Yes.
to take a certain number and participation of
yes,
women. And
from
of course,
women.
we have a gender mainstream desk in my office.
Okay.
Where we also work hand in hand with other programs. Like the UNDP. So anytime there are any activities that requires us to empower women. I've even held a workshop. With the same women, engineers in rural electrification. So they have like a small association, and
Okay.
anytime they require any support for us to speak, for us to share our programs with them, to continue to encourage them to go into rural education, we don't shy away from it.
Engineer Ahmad, I know that there's so much you're doing. You're going all over the place and trying to provide, rural electrification. But I'm sure it's not just all about work, work, work. You must have some time to relax. What do you do in your leisure hours?
I think mainly is I watch football.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
so I'm a keen supporter of the Premier League. So I think that's my major pastime.
Which club do you support? Let's
I
hear.
support Chelsea.
Please, let's have a handshake on that.
Yes.
Yes, I found a compatriot here.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And of course, I enjoy spending time with my family, with my wife, my kids. When there's time, at least travel to spend some time. It's very, very important for the balance. Just to ensure that, as you said, even though it's not as easy to balance it, but we have to put in our all. Just to ensure that you are also not, ignoring the important things in life.
Exactly, the home is very important too.
Your family, my mother, and my siblings. Just to be sure that we balance. Everything is balanced, so it's not all about work. So you
alone,
always
yes.
create time to spend with them as well.
Yes, that's important. So what's your final word to Nigerians in terms of, yes, you've encouraged us to be more, to be patient, to have some more patience. Okay, we'll try, even though, the patience has been like 62 years coming and going and still counting. So your final word to Nigerians.
My final word to Nigerians is we need to believe in our country. We need to ensure that when we are given responsibility, we deliver that responsibility with the highest commitment. It's not about government. What are you doing to improve your own community? When last have you helped somebody? When last have you been able to intervene in your own community? So everybody needs to take responsibility. Let's not push the can and say this is for you to do or this is for you to do. Take responsibility, improve your home, improve your community, improve your immediate environment, and then we can begin to make progress. But the whole idea of saying, is this person's fault or is that person's fault? I think we need to refrain from doing that. We need to believe in our country. We need to improve our country, our own selves, and not always shy away from that responsibility. So for me, this is what I want to say. And then when there are improvements as well, let's be positive enough to actually recognize those improvements.
Thank you very much, Engineer Ahmad Salihijo, the
welcome.
MD CEO of Rural Electrification Agency.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We can only wish you the very best of luck. And of course, that we'll keep monitoring your progress and your activities.
Thank you very much, Lala. It's been a pleasure.
Same here.
Thank you.
I have been speaking with the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Rural Electrification Agency, REA, and well, just taking a cue from what he said just a few minutes ago. We all must, in our own little spaces, try to impact the lives of other people and not just trading blames here and there. There's so much that you can do, there's so much that I can do to improve the lot of we Nigerians and of Nigeria in general. That's what I'm taking away from this program today. And of course, you know that he's representing the young ones who are not too young to rule, representing well there. That's the size of it today on Executive Discourse. We do hope you've had a good time with us. Let's do this again, same time next week on the network service of the NTA. I am Ololade Adinijadili. Keep believing in Nigeria. Bye-bye.